So, colleagues, we have a couple of people online, but it's just after 1. But a huge thank you to the people who are here in the room, and a special welcome to our deanery team. We've got a dean and 2 deputy deans at the space seminar. I think this is really a first for face. I don't know. We're not going to make any reference to the. It's probably the company, not the refreshments at the back.
It's definitely the very provocative talk we're about to
Well, yeah, well, that is really so good to be able to welcome Shailey here. Shailey, the last time you were here was in 2018. Yeah.
Or 2017.
2017. Yeah. So in that time, something that changed here.
Yes.
But it's something that remained the same. And I think the beautiful thing was maybe just to also acknowledge Prof Derek Hellenberg for making this initial connection with Shailey and your department at the University of Minnesota. We were just remarking that sometimes these relationships, they start, but they're very much connected to an individual or a team. And there's sometimes when there's transitions of leadership and roles that these relationships sometimes suffer. But I can really testify this relationship is one that has just grown from there. And I mean, the fact that you had dinner with Derek last night, just shows about the relationship is just more than just collegial. It's really friendships that have been developed. Yeah. So, and I just want to also do justice because Shailey is not just an amazing person and a friend, but also a world-renowned researcher, scholar in the field of family medicine, and particularly global health and rural health. He's the Associate Vice President for the Global and Rural Health at the University of Minnesota, so at a university level. And at the departmental level, he's also the Carlson Chair of Global Health and Executive Director of his own center, the Center for Global Health and Social Responsibility. He's also the Professor and Vice Chair of the oldest and biggest department of family medicine in the US. The department has been training, and I had a pleasure last year to visit you in May of training both in urban and rural sites for over 50 years now. Yeah, since early 70s. And I had the pleasure there. Obviously, they have a different medical school system, but a 4-year graduate degree. But I think is it in the 3rd year? Yeah. For 9 months, there's a longitudinal clerkship model where the students that I had a pleasure of visiting is a small place called Big Fork. Which is appropriately named, where there was one medical student for a team of 3 family physicians and their local team, and just that experience witnessing that in action. And a large part of that is also your role to make sure that continues to grow. And I think at the moment, I'll talk to you a bit about the grant. At the moment, you're also developing further rural training sites. So you're also an adjunct professor in the School of Public Health and a fellow and Institute on the Environment at the University of Minnesota. He's also honorary visiting professor here at the University of Cape Town, as well as at Ain Shams University in Cairo, Egypt, and Udayana University in Denpasar, Indonesia. He has been inducted into the Academy of Excellence in the Scholarship of Education at the University of Minnesota. And Dr. Prasad is also passionate about leadership development. So he's a co-director of the Rothenberger Leadership Academy, a cohort-based leadership training program at the University of Minnesota. And he's the co-lead of the CDC-funded National Resource Center for Refugees, Immigrants and Migrants, and an NIH faculty-funded Northern Pacific Global Health Consortium. He's a founding member and part of the leadership team of the Advocacy for Global Health Partnerships. And he really has, as from a global health perspective, I think he can really say, I mean, we know a lot about the goods and bads of global health, but we can really testify that you have immersed yourself over decades. You mentioned 3 decades as a clinician, conducted health services research in rural areas, and engaged in education across disciplines. He's been part of the Rural Health Research Center at the University of Minnesota. He's actively involved in the Family Medicine Global Education Network, which I'm also privileged to be part of. And he has also been involved in academic department strengthening and mentorship training across various universities. So we are really grateful that we couldn't think of anyone else more fitting to talk to the topic of faculty development, which is something that we are very passionate about also at the faculty level, but also at the departmental level with our team of generalist scholars, but also expanding it beyond faculty from academics to also our key past and administrative and research staff. So we really look forward to your session.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Klaus. That was quite a long. I think my talk is done now. So. But the point you bring up is a key one. I had the privilege of meeting Derek Hallenberg at a conference in Minnesota years ago, and that sparked a robust conversation that has led to me meeting folks here in the department. Met Nazleen in conferences, Taslim visited us, Klaus visited us. So it's been a really strong relationship. I'm a firm believer that a lot of academic work needs to be based on mutual benefit and strong partnerships. I'm really happy that even after Derek retired, I'm having a place to come here and visit with you folks. So thank you. I don't want to say I'm an expert in this field. I'm not. I'm intrigued by this. And part of this intrigue is primarily because I feel sometimes that we do a disservice in medical education because we take good clinicians and expect them to be good teachers. We say, here you go. You're really good at some clinical skill. You know how to teach, right? And you're like, no, I have no idea what that is. I did a fellowship in academic medicine years ago, and the premise of it was partly to convince myself that I can teach, right? Because it was that uncertainty. What is it that I really need to, what buttons do I really need to push? And what I'm going to present today is more of my understanding of where we are with faculty development. This is by no means the comprehensive look at it. And I'm hoping that this would lead to some real positive interactions in the future too, right? So, okay, what are the challenges that we face? Now I'm going to open this up to you folks here. What are the challenges we face in creating clinical educators? Yes.
I don't think a lot of people know about teaching. Because I didn't know about it until I accidentally landed up in it and accidentally started enjoying it.
That's a good point. Yes.
I never ever thought of that as in my career ever.
Yeah.
Of becoming a teacher, because it's just not something that's really, I don't know. It's not something you think about when you start studying medicine.
That's a good point. Okay, excellent. Yes.
So it's not seen as a career path.
It's not seen as a career path.
Kind of building on that. It's not seen as clinician is the primary role. Everything else is sort of secondary. And if you've seen one and done one, then you can teach one. And so there isn't an understanding that there's a whole science and scholarship.
Right. You know, I'm reminded of a rather abject way of looking at it as those who cannot teach.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, if you're not good in clinical, maybe you can be a good teacher. Yes.
So the other thing is that the large majority of our staff are joint staff, which means that they're largely clinicians with only a 30% at best for the academic project. So in the context of a service that's really stretched, the service really pulls a lot of their time, and the teaching then becomes the thing that kind of suffers most, the teaching and the research suffers most. So, because ultimately I think many of our teachers on the joint platform are primarily clinicians that like to teach as something that they do additionally. So service almost takes priority.
That's so well put. I think this is universal, that we are almost always in deficit functioning, right? We don't have enough. We don't have enough academic faculty. And when you have an academic faculty that is expected to produce clinically, I was having a conversation with Klaus about this, and actually with Derek last night. In the US also, we have a similar model. We need to justify our existence, and the way we justify is by bringing the clinical revenue. And the way we are these days, there's not enough of us going around. There's not enough clinicians going around, so we get pulled in pretty quickly. That's really well put. Yes. Yes.
That's for this one, but you get paid a lot less as a teacher than clinician.
Yeah.
Same in the US, same everywhere else. Yes. You really need to be passionate to be doing it, right? So, yes. Good. Other thoughts? Yes, Tasli.
It's also something about identity, in the sense that we spend many years training to become clinicians, but what's wrapped up into that identity of being a clinician? And yet when we engage with patients, oftentimes we spend time teaching. If that's our, if kind of empowerment is part of our mindset.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the maybe a challenge in making that part of our identity explicit, which our training doesn't necessarily do.
That's a beautiful point, because we are so busy with the here and now of the clinical care that we don't look at the teaching part of it. I was thinking you were going from an identity viewpoint. One of the biggest challenges I've found when we get new faculty who've either just graduated and joining our academic field, or people who have been out in practice and coming back into academia, we find that they have a tough time letting go. So they want ownership of the patient care so much that they don't want to let go of that. It's like, okay, it's okay for your registrar to take care of them. No, it's my patient. I want to take full ownership of this. So yes, and it's an identity question. Good. I think you folks have covered most of it. This is out in the literature. I have a bunch of resources I can hand over. There's a last part that's coming up quite a lot in the US these days. The premise of discordance due to diversity. Appropriately, we are seeing more diverse folks come into the medical field, but the teachers are not diverse enough. There's such a shortage. And this diversity is not just by race or ethnic identity, it's by economic class too. We've seen in the US that while we're doing better compared to 10, 15 years ago, of making our medical students more diverse, we are rarely seeing folks from economically underprivileged classes come into medicine, right? So this discordance is very important, because it's difficult for a teacher to relate experientially to what a student is, going through or understanding in that. So all of these are very critical. And the lack of alignment of goals we see a lot in the US these days, because the health systems are pushing towards productivity measured in clinical output. How many patients have you seen? What procedures you've done? So the time that you spend in teaching is considered to be a waste, right? So that is a very strong part of this. So then let's step back a second and say higher education. There have been institutions of higher education for a long time, right? But what's unique about a clinician educator? And you folks have covered a lot of this. We do expect a certain degree of comprehensiveness in a clinician educator. And that comprehensiveness is both in terms of understanding different health, different parts of the body, of course, but beyond that, right? Health systems, interface between community and the clinical side of things. What happens once you are done seeing a patient? We are expected in the US to know a lot more about insurance companies and how they function. and what would happen if you prescribe a patient a medication and the patient is not able to take them. There are much more regulatory requirements that have come in. I think I was sharing with Klaus, one of the sad parts about our registrar, we call them residents in the US, training in the US, is that the cost of education has been climbing exponentially. The current estimate for us is for every family medicine, this is family medicine, for every family medicine resident, it costs $350,000 per resident per year. So it's nearly $1 million for a 3-year residency. That's how much the health system has to pay, right? And there are various reasons for this, and one of the important parts of this is the regulatory requirements. The number of people you are allowed to supervise, the number of the different T's that you have to cross and I's that you have to dot. I'm not saying they're not important, but as the regulations change every year, it feels like the burden of that, the administrative burden of training a physician has gone up significantly. There's more push towards interprofessional collaborations. This is probably going to sound sacrilegious when I say this, but the outputs of that are more difficult to measure. We can talk about it from a value system. It's very important to have interprofessional training, et cetera, et cetera. But if you want to convert that into money, it becomes very much more difficult to measure. So we are seeing, and COVID has probably stressed us enough now to say that there are some health systems that are asking the question, did it really make a difference? We would like to say yes. My gut feeling is yes. But I want to make sure the gut feeling is not because I really know the pharmacy faculty and the nursing faculty. They're good friends of mine, right? We need to see what is the true value that we bring in this. There's a premise of live teaching, right? It's not theoretical. It's happening in front of you. Some of the decisions you make during this are going to be very critical. And it's an important factor. And I'll come back to that in a minute because I think it's something for us to keep in mind, engaging where our learner is. Like if you're with a medical student versus a 3rd-year registrar that you worked with for hours, there's a difference. And the trust factor is also critical in this. The last part is obviously a key part of it. I feel that whenever I go back and look at all our departments' history of the students, learners, medical students, and residents who've been let go, the primary concern has been about patient safety. It might have manifested as a professionalism lapse or something like that, but the primary concern, primary reason we end up letting, which is very unusual in the USL, right? In the last 10 years, we produce about 56 registrars, residents, graduates every year. The last 10 years, we have let go of 3. So it's not very common, right? But when it happens, it's primarily around the patient safety aspect. So, just a show of hands, how many of you here have heard of the Dreyfus model? Okay, I'm a big fan of the Dreyfus model. I think one of the main reasons is David Leach, who brought the Dreyfus model into clinical education, was a mentor of mine and somebody I looked up to for many years. I use this as the framework of obviously grading where a learner is, but also planning what kind of learning needs to occur from an educator viewpoint. In my understanding, and you folks feel free to counter this, the first stage, being a novice, is a typical medical student. I call it the hunter-gatherer state. They go and hunt a lot of information, right? The latest and greatest Google things, and come to you with a list of like 20 different, you're like, oh, I haven't even heard of that, right? That is the medical student stage. And this part between the 2 green lines is residency education or registrar education. That's agriculture. You need to plan. You need to know when the rains are coming, right? You need to know when to harvest. All of that is part of being a registrar, being a resident in the US context, right? And we tend to look at it as 3 levels. And I deliberately changed this because this is my understanding. I'll tell you in a minute why. That's why there are quotes around it. Competent, proficient, and expert, or near peer. Okay, the original Dreyfus model talks about advanced beginner, competent, proficient, right? So, and they put the expert up here. I did this deliberately because I like to talk about mastery in a minute. What does competency mean for me? Competency means that somebody is ready to see a patient. That's it. They're not competent to take over the world. That also means that they need to be under maximal supervision. This is an important phase because they're the ones still taking care of the patient. The one-on-one relationship that is sacrosanct in the field of medicine still exists primarily between the learner and the patient, but that occurs under maximal supervision, right? Proficient means, yeah, they've gotten to be a little faster in seeing patients. They work under minimal supervision. And an expert is more what we would call a near peer. Like if you're a clinician educator, you would look at an expert learner as somebody who's near peer. And again, feel free to change the terminologies. I like this because this is a way I have conceptualized with our learners. The near peer stage is very important because it's an understanding that when somebody's graduating from registrarship, residency in our case, they're ready to be a lifelong learner. They're not the finished product. And there's a critical distinction, right? It's a critical distinction because you expect them to be ready for independent practice. That does not mean that they're a master in the field. So what does mastery mean? Well, mastery is life after residency. There are various frameworks of what mastery is. You folks have probably heard, right? 1,000 hours of work in a particular hobby will make you a master in that hobby. 1,000 hours of work. I'm like, where did that number come from? We talk about mastery being the ability to put abstract concepts instinctively in their place. You've seen 1,000 pneumonias. It's the ability to say something doesn't fit. Something deep inside me says something doesn't fit. I can't explain why yet. I'll come back to that. I might have to go back to and look at all the labs. But there is an understanding that something doesn't fit. That is mastery, right? And I'm not in any way saying that the gut feeling is the one we are trying to inculcate here. It's the ability to put those. As a learner, you've developed your own heuristics, your own biases too. And you've combined those heuristics and biases together to form an opinion that sometimes come really quickly. We found it very difficult sometimes when you have a struggling learner, struggling medical student, or a struggling first-year resident or registrar. We found it very difficult to pair them with an experienced teacher. Because they're like, how did you figure that out? Tell me step by step what happens. So generally when we have a struggling learner, we try to pair them with a second year. Somebody who's at this level, somebody who's going through things methodically, step by step by step. Don't pair them with an experienced person because then, like, I'm lost. I might as well quit, right? So if this is the framework that we are looking at our education system, from a clinician educator viewpoint, our approach needs to be different. If I'm approaching a medical student, a novice, like I'm approaching a master learner, then I'm wrong. I should be able to create frameworks. I should be able to talk about relevance. I should be able to talk about application. Versus if it's a master, I'm just teasing and letting go. Here, you figure it out. I'm just going to introduce two new fancy words. You figure it out. That, I think, is a critical difference. And as educators, we need to approach our craft in that way too, right? So the other important thing is the recognition that the 21st century learner is different. And we've all recognized this, right? The amount of information available is tremendous. They don't respond to emails. I think that might be universal, right? Maybe I need to get on TikTok or Snapchat or something like that. Look at it! So there is this premise of being digital natives, which has both positives and negatives. The positive, of course, is that the ability that they have in bringing information together is tremendous, right? We really shouldn't be teaching Krebs cycles anymore. We should show them how to pull it up on iPhone. But inherent to that premise is the amount of biases that are created. All kinds of digital presentations are filled with biases. The minute you start looking at in the US, we had electronic medical record system. And I have residents who sit in front of that for 30, 40 minutes and they just had a patient come in. And every time they're sitting there, I'm like, oh God, this guy's digging a deeper ditch. Because they're forming some strong biases based on what they see in that electronic medical record. They're not independently evaluating things, right? So the challenge for us is how do we then allow them to be in their digital native state and challenge them, bring them out of it. Talk about why the first thing you get on Google is not the answer, right? So that's the typical challenge we have. You folks have probably heard of this. One of the things that gets my blood boiling is when I have a learner say, oh, I've seen enough. No, if not, you've seen a couple of pages of Google, now come on. But that, I'm not in any way saying that we need to take them out of their digital nativity. We need to keep them in that, but we need to be able to provoke them to go beyond that, prompt them to nudge them to think beyond that, right? Otherwise, you end up with a much more strongly biased setup in decision making. 21st century learners are considered to be better about learning through inquiry, which I think is critical. So a snowballing mechanism, like they see something, and there's a word that comes up or something, a new concept that comes up, digging deeper into it. Which Klaus and I had a chat a long time ago about rhizomatic learning, where you are approaching a topic, and as you're approaching the topic, it's not a linear path. You hear something else, so you move to the next one, and then you keep going down that path, and then suddenly, oh, there's another thing I need to learn. This is beautiful. It's chaos. Absolutely chaos, but it's beautiful, right? We expect them to be global citizens. We expect them to be more active learners. We think they're more collaborative. There are times when I've been wondering that, because there is a very strong, highly individualistic streak that comes up quite often in our learners too. I feel that that more collaborative point is something for us to look at. A few years ago, we did an interesting study. We didn't have great numbers, so we didn't end up publishing that. On looking at locus of control of our students and seeing how they did in different tasks like tests, self-efficacy, ability to work with others. And we got a mixed result. There has been some studies that have shown that people with a higher internal locus of control go into highly specialized fields because they're more driven. I'm not sure that is good because they don't tend to be good at working with others. So then what are you going to do, right? So this working with others, the more collaborative part is something we need to explore more. And then the premise of being self-directed, I think, is a critical point here too. So with all that, I do feel that sometimes we miss the opportunity of pushing the premise of our learning models to be rooted in aggregate. We hear about pedagogical models all the time. We don't talk about the environment in which it's created, right? You folks probably know this. Pedagogy is teaching a child. Pedagogy is teaching an adult. And an adult, you give them the playground and let them play. Yes?
Can I just speak to your slide quickly?
Sure, please.
So it's something just struck me as you were going through this. So I would maybe modify the first term, digital natives, and some way put the word naive in. Naive digital natives.
Okay.
Because one of the problems with information overload is a lack of perspective.
Yeah, good point.
A lack of the ability, because experience gives you that.
Yeah.
When you're just kind of overloaded and saturated with data, and you can't work your way through it, you kind of, so there's a naivety attached to that. I see that in my own kids.
Yeah.
They would say, what does this mean? And take everything at face value to be the truth.
Right.
So there's a naivety attached to that. The second thing is quite interesting, that learn to inquire. So it's kind of the five whys on steroids.
Yes.
I mean, so why must we get in the car? So why do I need to put the seatbelt on? Why will I fly through the air if we come to a sudden stop? It's kind of this. It's kind of it's linked to that naivety, the sense that we learn through inquiry because we don't know the world yet. And I wonder whether this is where I'm getting at. Are we potentially overestimating our learners' ability to navigate an adult space, which is pretty complex that even we struggle to navigate sometimes?
You know, it's testing. You met Renee Critchlow. Klaus, you probably did. Renee is a colleague of mine. She was at the University of Minnesota. She's at Boston University right now. She's going to be the next president of the Society of Teachers of Family Medicine. She used to use the word productive learning. And her point was, when you talk about learning to inquire, the why question, why on steroids, almost is an antagonistic. Why should I do this? Rather than a why based in humility. Right? It's like, I want to know, so tell me why, versus why.
Indeed.
So that there is that tension that comes in that, who are you to tell me? Like, why should I learn this? As opposed to the why based on that curiosity factor, the humility, the humble learner part of it. The second part sometimes is that the field that we are in is extremely complex. Medicine is extremely complex. And sometimes there's a time for us to say, trust the process. There are some steps here, so please trust the process. You'll understand the why better if you trust the process, right? So, yeah. But thank you for that. Thank you for that, Dusty. Yes?
I wonder if I may just follow on Justin's comment that what's emerging as you're speaking is this notion of inquiry as a clinical skill.
Yes.
Because we often use this inquiry as a separate activity from the relationship-based activity of inquiry.
Yep.
And that, to me, is quite a fundamental thing. So your comment earlier where you say you don't pair an entry-level person with a master, I found quite intriguing. Because in fact, we don't legitimize in our systems the master's way of inquiring. Because we teach people at the beginning usually a long-winded consultation process.
Yep.
And then they marvel at the master's ability to cut through the garbage. And yet that's an essential learning, and we almost reserve that for the masters. And I'm wondering if we don't make it an integral part, that if we see inquiry as a clinical skill, then all of life is an inquiry.
Yeah.
And even the master has a technique of inquiry that we often keep our juniors out of.
That's a beautiful
That's what
point.
makes us clever, you know. We just look so good when we're smart. And that's part of the thing for me.
I think you have something there, and I would like to give an example. So Klaus mentioned the rural visit he did to Big Fork. He had to fly a small plane all the way down to Big Fork, down to Minnesota, almost the Canadian border. So that program is called the Rural Physician Associate Program, the first longitudinal integrated clerkship in the world. And we have something similar we call the MetroPAB, where we place 30 medical students for 9 months in one of our residency sites at the Broadway clinic. You folks who went there. And at that clinic, we have experienced clinicians who've been in practice for 20 plus years, relatively new clinicians, third-year residents, second-year residents, first-year residents, and medical students. And I heard from the students that they were able to gauge where they will be. And that was unintentional, right? That was not part of the design. But they felt that, oh, I know what a third-year resident should function like. I know when Dr. Wooten sees a patient, he has got some skills, some techniques that someday I will learn too. Yeah, so it's a good point there. I think we need to explore that some more, like the promise of what's to come, right? Yes. So yes, that's wonderful. So think about that a little more. Thank you. Other thoughts, questions? Yes.
You know, when you were talking earlier, then you spoke about inquiry from a place of humility versus antagonism or whatever. And as I was reading through your list, when you put it up, I felt that the humanity in there was missing. We're a clinical practice, and I kind of feel that more and more, especially when now we're becoming more digital, becoming, you know, all these things here are really wonderful, but there's the humanity for me. Maybe it's in between, but I'm just feeling like more and more we should be more explicit about the humanity part, because you've got these teenagers that have been looking at their phones for the last 5 years and grunting at us as parents, saying very little, and then they come and we expect them. You can see I've got teenagers. Like everything is wrong. How are you? Like is the word. You know, and I think, you know, and how do we get them to remember that it's not about the 1,000,001 facts that you know about what's happening around the world, whatever. I mean, I think you were talking about it when you were talking about the interpersonal, the humanity, the connection, because I think the more we become more clever and sophisticated, that's the price. That's what we're leaving behind, the humanity, you know?
I love the fact that you bring this up. I have a slide coming up to talk a little bit about that, but I think we have to be explicit about it. We tend to get to, you know, one of the biggest challenges, even in the field of global health, we talk about after World War II, is that we have embraced biomedical reductionism to the extreme, that we have forgotten the biopsychosocial interplay that occurs every step of the way. And your word is, I think, a critical word there. Humanity is a huge part of that. Why are we doing what we're doing? Not just what are we doing, right? Really.
So just, last week I was behind the curtain and there were third years interviewing patients. And they would read that 3-stage assessment perfectly, but when they went on, they would shoot me. And the patient was like on oxygen.
I'll get my assessment out
But they couldn't
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it is, we have this problem sometimes when I'm rounding with the Americans and I have to tell them it's okay not to use a stethoscope.
Yeah.
Just sit down and talk. You don't have to like, Yes, excellent. Other thoughts?
I think that I'm also thinking about constantly, while listening to the presentation is this question of where learning happens. And I think some of the challenges that we have with the digital info overload and the digital inquiry, the critical inquiry, it seems that there's still a mismatch sometimes within a pedagogical context where learning is happening on a theoretical platform with the subject of study being the patient, not present. And so I know that, for example, we are currently trying to transform that. We're trying to embed education within the clinical setting at a community level.
It's a beautiful question because we did a faculty level debrief in one of our programs, and one of the things that came out of that was so close to my heart. Said the learning occurs everywhere. And then the question is, because there is this premise of learning occurring due to a didactic session, a lecture given by a professor, right? That's how I learned in medical schools, right? Lecture, 200-person classroom, and somebody gave a talk, and I probably slept through most of it, but that was learning, right? How do you then convert it into learning occurring in every step? In that brief interaction, Renee, that you mentioned, in stroking the patient's back and sitting down and listening. And then what is the role we have as educators to prompt that? Like, where do we ask, hey, can you tell me what happened there? Just creating that environment of inquiry right there. Let's debrief there, right? You know how they say in adult education, debriefing is more important than the experience itself, right? So sometimes, sorry.
So I think this leads very carefully onto something that we are grappling with, which is the concept of teaching versus learning. So we talk about teaching and learning and assessment, and the students have a perspective that if you aren't in front lecturing, you're not teaching and not earning your keep. And so, and whereas actually, particularly the more senior students, but even at entry level post school, is that it's really about, and so the self-directed is interesting because we are grappling with very limited self-direction, is that it's your job. In fact, I had one yesterday, which a convener's been told, I'm here, now make me pass. So it's that concept of, that you're here to teach me, and versus understanding that I'm responsible for my learning journey, and you as teacher are here to facilitate my learning journey, and to kind of help me navigate that journey. So I think we're really grappling with getting students into that headspace, because at the moment it's very much on the kind of, you need to teach me, and if you haven't taught me, then why am I paying fees?
Well, I think there are two parts here. One
very
is
simplistically, and polarity.
And I'm wondering if this term 21st century learner itself is wrong, because it's what, 20 years old now? And the expectation of what that teaching versus learning, I think, is a critical point. I'm reminded of one, we were doing pretty badly that we were not giving enough feedback. So we went through this mode, which was sad. Then all our educators would go to a resident and say, hey, let me give you feedback. 1, 2, 3. I just gave you feedback.
And these were signposted.
Can you please confirm that I gave you feedback?
You'll get a call from
Or this is feedback, right? So, no, I think there is something there, but how do we create that environment where you where is that expectation of it being a very dynamic process, the teaching learning component being very dynamic. But I'm with you. I think there is something we need to explore a little more about our learners these days. I'm not in any way saying they're bad. There's some super smart folks there. The style is different, right? So is there something that we're missing in that too? Right? So, yeah. This was an article that influenced me a lot. This is not a new one. It's about 20 years old. And this came from a Scottish commission, and every few years I go back to it and see has it changed much. I feel it really captures everything in it, and it talks about an approach to a learner being rooted in this 3-circle diagram, right? The first one is a professionalism, second is the approach to task, and then the performance of tasks. If we concentrate only on this, then we miss that. I do believe the humanity part that you brought up should be part of the professionalism aspect of it too. Otherwise, it's like, why are we doing this, right? I keep telling my residents that if it is a punching in a couple of protocols, my friend desk staff who are really much better in computer knowledge than you are will do a better job. I want you to understand why a little more. Tell me why, and tell me when not to use things, right? And then how do you then approach this in various aspects? The clinician as a teacher is what we concentrate a lot. These are technical intelligences. How to do a particular procedure in a particular way, how to let folks do an history and a physical exam. All those are very technical pieces. They're very important. I'm not trying to minimize them, but we concentrate a lot on these. But what Hesketh and her team indicate is that there's so much more about the professional aspects. The personal intelligence is about gauging where a student is. How do you push the right buttons sometimes? How do you step back? Or when do you step back? Or when do you push sometimes? And then how is your approach to teaching? And what are the ways you have to manifest this as an intellectual intelligence, emotional intelligence, analytical intelligence, and creative intelligence? For me, this is a good guidepost. I marvel and say, oh, I have a long way to go then. Because it feels like there is more I need to incorporate every time I'm thinking about a learner, right? Because I have to step back and say, something didn't go well then. I want to talk about that in a minute, about what can you do to use that something didn't go well. Like I had this interaction with a student and it didn't go the way I wanted it. So let's not analyze the student here, let's not analyze the learner. What did I do that didn't go well? What should I do different, right? So, there has been a lot of attempts in measuring the quality of an educator. How do we measure how good an educator is? And a friend of ours, Prof Prasad, had sent his article about milestones of a clinician educator. That prompted me to start looking. There are a lot of articles about milestones as a clinician educator. I went through all of them. Very interesting. I hope I never have to use them. And I'll tell you why. In the US, there's been a huge push towards milestones for learners, right? And the milestones now, the newer language is EPAs, entrustable professional activities. Part of me is skeptical there because when we started the milestones project in the US, I was really excited. It felt like it's a nice map, nice roadmap. But over the years, I've seen it being converted into checklists. And the milestones were supposed to be formative. And then you put everything together, and end of the year, you have a summative that tells us where a particular learner is. I sat through a few. Klaus was with me when we sat through one of them. I'm so disappointed because it finally felt to, oh, he's such a nice person. Well, that's got nothing to do with evaluation, right? Yeah, nice is good, but that's different. How good is he as a learner has got nothing to do with that subjective feeling. You should observe and say what's going on. So our milestones, I feel, and this is not unique to that particular program, Klaus, I've been digging a little bit deeper, multiple programs within our state and around the country, it's been converted into checklists. It doesn't really translate well into gauging where a person is, right? I'm afraid something like that is going to happen to gauge where an educator is too. Because it's like, I think Klaus is such a nice guy, so he must be a great teacher. Or I've seen you do really good, procedure, so you must be a really good teacher. It's not the same. So I'm still a skeptic that these milestones are a good idea. The practical application, I have major concerns. And I've been looking for applications in larger settings of this, and I've not seen them. If you have one, I would love to see how you guys do this. So I can steal that too. So. In contrast, one of my mentors had indicated to me years ago that he liked to look at an academic career of an educator in stages. Early career, one teaches. Mid-career, one develops the curriculum. Late career, one sets the direction of the field. Now, these are not exclusive. You can be a late career and then still teach. They're not chronological. You can have a lot of gray hair and still be an early career. And they're not meant to be subservient to one another. It doesn't mean that an early career person has to listen to what's going on elsewhere. But I like this definition because for me, it was much more easier to understand. I still bristle when somebody called me mid-career one day. Like, no, I'm young. Now they stopped calling me mid-career, so it doesn't matter. But I found this to be a better understanding of where somebody is. It helped us at a larger level, at the department level. We have 7 residency programs. We have 4 fellowship programs scattered all over the state. We have more than 100 faculty. So it gives us an idea to say how many early career, how many mid-career, how many late career, so that we can sort of plan education activities within that context better, right? So, quick mention, approaches to clinical educator courses. You folks have heard of this, formal courses, quite a lot of them. They have some advantages. They give structured learning, might give guidance. I think the third point here is critical. Formal courses, the best thing about formal courses is it's networking. It's the realization that you're not the only lunatic in the asylum. There are others like you who have no clue what's going on. And in some places, a formal recognition too, right? So yeah, I think that for me, I'm at that stage where I feel like I go to conferences just to connect and get ideas rather than listening through a whole lecture on any particular topic, right? So, what about the environment? I think this is where departments, schools have a huge role to play. We need to set the stage. We need to set the environment for learning and also understand that clinician educators are lifelong learners themselves. The tricks we learned 20 years ago may not be very practical now, so we might need to keep changing that. I'm going to go through this a little quickly. What's happening in my department, the Department of Family Medicine and Community Health at the University of Minnesota Medical School. We have a coursework for early faculty who join us. The first one is a cohort-based model. It's called TEACH. This is Teaching, Education, and Curriculum for Health Professionals. Run over 6 months. Everybody who joins the department gets to do that. It is non-threatening, not heavy coursework. You don't take home a whole lot of homework. It's meant to create an environment of support for each other. And everybody who comes in goes through that. We have what's called a CSI, which is a clinical scholarship intensive, which is for folks who come into academia with not much background in writing or research. And the scholarship initiative is to get them started, again, making it non-threatening. We do a formal mentor-mentee pairing. I'm not a huge fan of that because I feel that you need to find your own mentor. You need to get the chemistry going. I've not seen many formal mentor-mentee pairs really succeed. The mentor-mentee pairing that I've had are ones who sought me out, and now we have had a relationship sometimes more than 10 years. They're the ones that survive. That's me. But as a department, we still do it. We're starting a new process called the first 100 days of an educator. I'm excited about this. It's like a roadmap. When you join a department, what happens in the first 100 days? I don't know how this is going to go, but I'm excited because it feels like there is some like steps that you'll go, oh, at least you'll go and meet some people. Okay, good. You know, so there are some resources in the medical school you can tap into, right? Things like that. And the last one is peer mentoring. I want to talk a little bit about that. We've created some unstructured peer mentoring networks of folks who are about the same chronological age in academia. The first 5 years of academia, for example, they're all put together. They find a place to meet. They usually hang out in a coffee house, chat, complain a lot, talk about how it's unfair that they don't get paid, all of that, right? Which is important, but we want to make sure it's not destructive, that it's productive, right? It's been touch and go because we've had some times where it's actually created some negative spirals, which is not the purpose of it. Letting steam out is important, but it shouldn't be a negative spiral, right? The second one is something that is dear to my heart. It's a model called Ecstasis, which is a very structured peer mentoring model. And that would go something like this. I would say I had a bad encounter with, an encounter with a learner that didn't go well. I would present that as a case to my peers in confidence, and then I would shut up. They can ask technical questions. When did this happen? How often does this happen? Has this happened to you before? And then I keep quiet, and then they do a discussion about what happened. I have to keep quiet and listen. I have to undergo that torture because I can't get my defenses up. It's been a really good model for us. I feel this is where we have incorporated Heskett's principles the best. So we have brought in, oh yeah, you know what? Maybe there is something we need to look at in the creative space here. And I have learned so much from my peers this way. We've also come to an understanding that there are some technical skills we might need some extra training, extra coaching. So is there somebody in our university who does this? So we can tap into that person to come in too. I have a bunch of references. Every presentation needs to have one busy slide, and this is mine. So. Thank you. I'm sorry, I sped up the last few minutes.
No, this is on time. I mean, it's 2 o'clock, and I just mindful that we're about to have the how did the Fully say this morning? Hopefully, the president will give us a few more minutes just to be online. I'm mindful that there were quite a few colleagues online, about 15 or so. And I see some colleagues that were also thanking, sharing their appreciation, asking about the Ecstasis framework, but I think there's probably in that list of references.
Yeah, we can talk about, I've done training in Ecstasis. We do it annually at the National Institute of Health for our global health scholars too. And our hope is that it becomes a structured peer mentoring model for the rest of their lives. Our goal then is to recognize that there is wisdom in the collective. And sometimes that wisdom may not come with many alphabets after your name, right? It might be based on the experiences we've had, and how do we then tap into that experiences, and all of us learn from that, right? But it's a structured way, so it's not about complaining or hopefully less emotional, more analytical approach towards it. So we can talk about how to do that more sometime.
Comments or questions online or in person? I'm just mindful that we're going to lose our online audience maybe there.
Can you check just briefly that 6 month, the 6 month coursework that is part of the teach? Can you just tell us a little bit about that? Is it an online? Is it hybrid?
So during COVID times, we made it online. Otherwise, it was in person, and that was deliberate. We wanted people to be together because the whole premise was to create the cohort of learners, right? It would start with premise of how you develop a curriculum, and then we would get everyone to come up with a small capstone project, which is not onerous, preferably one they're developing one already for the programs. Might be a specific new content area, something like that. And that 6 months time was our primer to get a new faculty being oriented towards being a clinical educator.
Just really like come like once a week over a 6 month period.
I can send you the
Okay,
structure.
great.
I'll send you the structure. I'll send it through Klaus. I'll send you the structure.
That'd be
What they
great.
do.
That'd be
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
We developed it in family medicine, and it got so popular that we've had other department folks who have sent folks to our department to do it. Because the premise is similar, being a clinician educator, right? So,
Thank you very much.
one.
On here. So we have colleagues online still on this device in case we are losing the connection. Yeah. It looks like, I mean, it looks like we are coming almost like to a natural end here, but I think there might be more questions here. I mean, we certainly would like to take a group photo with everybody being here.
You know, one of the things that struck me as we were speaking to this idea of so in a domain like family medicine, teaching is highly valued as a relationship-based experience.
Yeah.
We as I'm leading now, I'm really mindful of how do you put this into a busy surgical units practice in relation to their students and registrar, because one of the things that we haven't always focused on, and I'm really pleased that your staff has emerged from a specialist training environment.
Right.
Is that I don't think we do great specialist pedagogy or anthropology. We're very good at the undergraduate and far in advance of pedagogy. But this concept of managing our postgraduate setting, where, in fact, the way we accredit the site, for instance, is just purely on the number of consultants available, the number of patients, and do you have the equipment to teach? Yes. That's it. It's not about how will you know at the end of the first year what the resident is capable of. And that, I mean, I'm taking that away today, is how we enrich that part of the process.
One thing that's bothered me a lot in the last many years is that when we look at medicine, we sometimes don't recognize its wide skills, right? From a strongly cognitive-based discipline to all the way to a highly super specialized skills-based area, right? And the entire spectrum in between. You know, I think you've heard the adage, does it matter if a surgeon has bad bedside manners? He should be a super skilled surgeon. Comes up all the time, right? But that's a critical point for us to keep in mind as we look at both the cognitive development and the skill development of a learner. I do feel that there is something in between from both the pedagogical models and the environment in which it is created, that you expect that some learning will occur that way. One thing we started deliberately after procedures is a debrief immediately after and make it routine. The procedure might have been gone splendidly, or it might have gone not so good. You have a debrief. And that was deliberate because it was like, yes, there are some hand skills that I can't replicate in a debrief, but I want you to think through what is it that happened, right? It's quite rewarding for an educator. I've talked to learners, and the learners have felt that they've now made sense what they were doing. So I do feel there are specific points, and then it goes back to the premise that some of this teaching is not hours of lecturing. It's 1 or 2 bullet points. It's like that nudge here, the push there kind of thing. And also all of this in the milieu, right? In the environment of learning or teaching. This is teaching.
I mean, I think that idea of reflection, so rather than consider it as debriefing all the time.
Yes.
I mean, in a group of final years that I've studied, all they were saying that they were really appreciate stopping at the end of the day and saying, how did that go? Without the teacher deciding what they would speak about.
Yeah.
Just how did that day go? Was there any learning at all, or did you just stand around waiting for teachers?
Yeah.
Those kind of reflective moments, I think, are often lost in the system.
I have a dear friend who's an orthopedic surgeon, and after every brief session or talk he gives, his question is, what could I have done better?
Yeah.
Because he found that anytime he said, how did it go? Oh, you were great.
I have to leave, but
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yes. Thank you. Can we take a quick